Parshas Matos-Masei. This week's Parsha has a number of events, and among them is the battle against the Midyanim. Moshe commands the children of Israel to send out troops to go to battle with the Midyanim, and they're very successful. They win decisive battles. They win the war. They capture people, spoils of war, etc. And Moshe and Elazar, the Kohen, Aaron has passed away. They go out to meet the victorious troops. And Moshe sees that there are some people who are still alive who were to have been killed in the war, some men and some women. And he got angry. And the verse says, this is in Perek Lamed Aleph Pasuk Yudal, that's 31:14. Vayitzof Moshe al pekudei hachoyel. Moshe got angry at the officers of the soldiers. Sarei ha'alafim, v'sarei ha'meos haba'im mitzvah ha'melchama. The officers of the thousands and the officers over the hundreds who returned from the battle. And Rashi comments on this, and he says, L'lamdacha shekol sirchon hador talui b'gdolim sheyesh koach bi'adam limchos. He says, first of all, this comes to teach us something. He doesn't address the troops. He addresses the officers. Why? Because the officers are responsible for the conduct of their reports, of their subordinates. And this comes to tell us a general principle, which is, Rashi extrapolates to an entire generation. When there is a corruption, a deviation in the generation, the blame lies with its leaders, because the leaders had the opportunity to influence their followers, and they did not. Now, obviously, if they don't have an opportunity, that's a different story. But there is a notion that if something goes wrong in the chain of command, the blame lies at the top. This is reflected in the book Extreme Ownership, which is about leadership. It's written by two former commanders in the Navy SEALs. And one of their principles is that a leader should not blame his subordinates. He should make sure that his subordinates are doing the right thing. And if they don't, he's the one to blame, not his subordinates. Okay, so Moshe gets angry and he castigates his officers. Now, keep in mind, this is the soldiers returning from the war against Midian. So there are spoils of war, and those are referred to as klei Midian, kelim shel Midian, the vessels of Midian. Well, how are the Jews who have since received the Torah, and they know they can only eat kosher food, and they can only eat from vessels in which only kosher food has been cooked, unless they purge, but they don't know these laws yet. So what happens? So in verse 21, that's Chaf Aleph, Vayomer Elazar HaKohen El Anshe HaTzavah HaBoim LaMelchama. So Elazar HaKohen says he's the priest, he says to the men who went to the battle, this is the law, Zos Chukas HaTorah, the law of the Torah, Asher Tziva Hashem es Moshe, that Hashem commanded Moshe. And then he goes on to say, Ach es HaZahav, ves HaKesef, ves HaNechoshes, ves HaBarzel, ves HaBdil, ves HaVarif. If there's a vessel that's made out of gold, silver, brass, iron, tin, lead, whatever, and now it goes into the laws of koshering. Whatever is used in fire must be used again in fire to purify. So if you have a pot in which something not kosher was cooked, you have to fill the pot with water and have it overflow. Kabol o kach poto. As it absorbs, so it expunges, it expels. So that's the general rule of koshering. We know that the lower the heat, the lower the necessity of the heat to kosher. Where these laws of koshering come from? They come from right here in this week's Torah. And they're referred to as klei Midian, gi'ulei nachrim. Sometimes it refers to removing the contamination that's used by in pots that non-kosher food has been used in. But let's look at who's doing the teaching here. It's Elazar HaKohen who says this. Vayomer Elazar HaKohen. And who does he quote? He quotes Moshe. Why didn't Moshe say it? Why rely on Elazar to say something that Moshe should have taught Moshe Rabbeinu? He's our teacher. Listen to Rashi. Rashi says, Lefi sheba Moshe lechlal ka'as, ba lechlal ta'us. Since Moshe fell into anger, he fell into error. Shinis alma mimenu halachos hilchos gilig nachrim. Goyim. He forgot the laws of koshering vessels that have been used for non-kosher food. And then Rashi quotes two other sources. One of them is with Aaron and Elazar and Isamar, when they were bringing offerings in the Shivas Yemei Miluim after the dedication of the Mishkan. But Nadav and Avihu had died, and the question was, should they eat, should they not eat, should they eat it with aninos? And he got angry and he forgot the halacha, and Aaron corrected him. He accepted the correction. But Rashi observes that when Moshe gets angry, he errs. Sometimes he errs by forgetting. Sometimes he errs by doing the wrong thing. That's in the next verse that Rashi quotes, which is from Bamidbar Chaf Yud Aleph, Yud and Yud Aleph. That's Bamidbar, that's Numbers 20, 10, and 11. What was that? That was when Hashem tells Moshe to speak to the rock after the Jews had complained about not having water, and to speak to the rock and bring out water. And instead Moshe hits the rock. And he says, Shimuna Hamorim. Listen, you rebels. And Chazal say that he lost his cool, and because he lost his cool, he erred, and he ended up hitting the rock. His anger is reflected in his saying, listen, you rebellious people. So there is a general rule. There's a general observation that Rashi is making. It's not just about Moshe, but it's Kol Chacham. Any wise person who gets angry, he loses his wisdom. Doesn't mean he loses it permanently, but it means that at the moment that he's angry, the nature of anger is that the person does not control his anger. His anger controls him. We'll listen to the words of the Rambam. This in Hilchos Deios, Perik Beis, Halacha Gimel. That's in the laws of appropriate attitudes or beliefs, 2nd chapter, 3rd halacha. He says, Hakas midah ra'ahi ad lema'od. This is in the context of talking about various attributes, characteristics, character traits that a person should have. And the Rambam generally says that a person should walk in the middle, right up the sweet spot, not too much to one side, not too much to the other extreme. But about ka'as, about anger, he says, never good. Roy la'adam she'yisrachek mimenu ad hakatzeh ha'acher. It's appropriate to distance yourself as much as possible. So even on things, he says, that would be appropriate to be angry, meaning that objectively they are outrageous, that where outrage is an appropriate response. Nevertheless, don't lose yourself. And it's apparent that when he says ka'as, he means when a person gets so inflamed, so intense with his emotion, that's all he's about, and he loses sight of other things, which is how a person can come to error. So he says, well, what about when you're supposed to? What about when you need to assert yourself? So he says you should, if you're dealing with children who have acted inappropriately, let's say that a child has walked into the street, ran into the street without looking, or he's too young that even if he does look, he can't be relied upon to cross safely. So you should look angry to the point that that child feels pain when you talk to him in a very stern voice, but you should never lose your cool. There are two principles. We talked about one of them, which is kol hakois. So im chacham hu, chachmaso mistalekes mimenu. So if he's a wise man, his wisdom escapes him. And also, Chazal say, kol hakois ki'ilu oved avodah zarah. Anybody who gets angry, it's as though he worshipped idols. Now, why would that be? So I remember hearing from my mother. I think she heard it in a class given by Rav Ruvain Aberman. Zechronam Levracha. Both my mother and Rabbi Aberman have passed away. She heard a shir. She came back. We spoke. She was in Yerushalayim. We spoke, and she said, "Kol hakoes ki'ilu avodah zarah." When somebody gets angry, it's as though he's serving avodah zarah, idols. Why? Because when a person gets angry, sometimes what he says is, you said that to me, you're doing that to me, you disobeyed me, you dishonored me. What's the standard? The standard isn't God. The standard isn't what's right or wrong. The standard is me. And I become the object of my own avodah zarah, of my own idol worship. So a person who succumbs to anger loses his balance, loses his sense of priorities. There's one gloss on this, though, and it's Reb Yerucham Levovitz says it. It's written in the Sefer Das Torah. There's also, I saw it in the name of the something Sam Labosam. In any event, that nevertheless we see that Moshe, although apparently he did get angry beyond the point that the Rambam says is acceptable, but we do see that even a person such as Moshe, who the Torah describes as anav mikol adam, anav ma'od, exceedingly humble, the humblest of all people. But a leader needs to know when to speak up. You can't play the humility card every single time and still be a good leader. You still need to be stern at times. You still need to be assertive and even harsh at times if you are going to turn people away from doing the wrong thing. It presents a risk. the risk is that you slide into anger. So like many things in life, the challenge is to get just the right amount, but not too much. Be strong, but not so strong that you lose yourself. Have a good Shabbos.